Good afternoon to all of you. Today we are into the 10th Research Lounge. We are happy to let you know that we mark the 10th milestone of our Trailblaze event. So, I think therefore this is a remarkable occasion for all of us today. We really appreciate your participation. Without your interest, I can't imagine how all this could have been possible. National and international academics, researchers, and students took part in this process. It's almost impossible to think how we could adequately express our gratitude to our mentor in this whole exercise, Dean FGS, dear sir, for your scholarly guidance, directions, instructions, and everything is done by you. In this research lounges, we discuss simple topics like how to start a research project, innovative research, etc. In another one, we open your eyes to new topics like thesis writing with R Markdown, LaTeX. We have raised awareness about some critical topics like ChatGPT. We introduced some AI tools used worldwide. Some lounges were open to discuss high-impact publications and publication journeys. We are not remembering one by one. The next step of the research lounge will start in April with some more color and diversity. Please keep sending us your new topics, new aspects, and new trends worldwide, and keep in touch with us. So, let me open today's research lounge and embark on another fruitful discussion. Please welcome our first resource person, Professor Stefan Seuring. He's a professor of supply chain management at the University of Kassel, Germany. He's one of the globally leading authors on sustainable supply chain management, but also covers topics on supply chain strategy, digitalization, and circular economy. Professor Stefan has collaborated in an interdisciplinary research project with colleagues from agriculture, engineering, and political sciences. The Web of Science and Clarivate Analytics listed him as a highly cited researcher in 2018, 2021, 2022 for Prospect, and 2019 and 2020 for Economics and Business. The next resource person is Ms.Jayani Sudusinghe. She's a research assistant at the University of Kassel, Germany, where she's doing her PhD in the chair of supply chain management under the supervision of Professor Stefan Seuring. She completed her bachelor's degree in the Department of Transport and Logistic Management from the University of Moratua with a first class, and also completed her master's degree in research from the same department. Her research interests lie in sustainable supply chains, circular economy, and supply chain collaborations. The next resource person is Mr.Biman Hettiarachchi. He is working as a research assistant at the University of Kassel under the chair of supply chain management. He is a final year PhD student supervised by Professor Stefan Seuring. Biman graduated with his first class from the Department of Transport and Logistic Management and then completed his master's degree at the Department of Computer Science. Biman is also the regional chairperson for South Asia at the Next Generation Forum of the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport. His research interests are on the intersection of sustainability and digital technologies such as additive manufacturing, Industry 4.0, and artificial intelligence. So, you all are warmly welcome to this special occasion. You're on stage to start your expert talks.
Yeah, many thanks for this nice and kind introduction. Many thanks for welcoming us at the University of Moratua, which Jayani and Biman, of course, know very well. But for me, it's the first time being here, and I feel very much welcomed, and we appreciate being here. What did we bring along? We tried to find a topic which is a bit wider, and not just from the area that we do research in, and more look at the research process. Yeah, the research is ongoing, and we even tried to publish this together with another colleague who's now at the University of Strasbourg in France, Philippe Sauer. And we now blend in some of the general research of the longer process and show how we used and how we did it in their two cases. Yeah, that's the general idea. Now that should hopefully work. Yeah, the mouse was in the wrong place. This is the overall structure. Let me rather overdo this because we go into the single steps. Now I'm a bit too fast. Slow it down. Now here we are, right. So we show a certain research process and we illustrate this with the starting key publications. The first one is from Jayani, the second one is from Biman, which are published in a leading international journal in the operations, production and supply chain management area. And we will use these examples to show how you can do this. What we will look at at all is what we call a literature review. This is now a fully developed method. And let me directly mention this upfront. We show this here as an own piece of research. So it's not just something that you do for writing an empirical paper or modeling paper where you also need to have a literature review section, but we put emphasis on showing this in total. And the typical challenge is that you have to, first of all, identify a research gap and develop some related research questions. And this is a typical challenge. And let me try to point this out. Jayani, how did you get your research topic?
Sorry, Stefan, you gave me the topic, so I had no other option.
Why was this the case?
Because we were involved in a project called Retrace. So it's the Horizon 2020 Mercury Innovative Training Network project. So the topic is anyway circular economy. So we had to set, I think you had to set your boundaries related to circular economy. So, and then we had to move on to something related to supply chain. So how circular economy can be integrated into supply chains. So this is where was the starting point.
And that's a typical point. Quite often when you go for such a topic, you might come into a setting where the topic, particular in the case of third-party funding, is decided already. Yeah, and that just to get this clear between applying and the student starting. In this case, we had about 1.5 years, and this is a normal time frame that you see in many cases. The application process itself took about 6 months for the evaluation. And then in the European Union, because there's multiple universities involved, the leading institution is the University of Sheffield in the UK, you then have to sign contracts and agreements and all of this. And before all of the formalities are done, there were another 4 months passed by, and then we had to, then we were finally allowed to open the posts and post the posts, and then Jayani could apply, and then it took some more time to get the visa and all the onboarding and all of these things. So you see how long this is the case. Now the challenge in this respect, and let me emphasize this is so you need to develop a topic that is not only holding for the period of time of the application, but from the point of start of the project to the end of the project, which is in this case the PhD, it's another 4 years. So we have to identify a topic that is good for, let's say, a minimum of 5 years. Yeah, and in this particular case, the already mentioned Philip Sauer and I basically did quite some search using a typical science tools, Web of Science, Scopus. We will return to them a bit later on again. And we tried to find topics which are not so much covered yet. So we saw that the circular supply chains, we will at least illustrate a few things there, had been developed already. We know that collaboration and integration, such topics are ongoing in the supply chain arena. They are basically long lasting. And now we could really see that at the intersection of the two, there's not too much. So that's why we thought this is a good idea. Now, let me also emphasize this is clearly a theory-driven identification of research topics. Of course, they can come from other directions, but in major research grants that you have in the European Union, some of them are at least, and this is one where it's really driven from the theory side. Let me turn almost to the other side. Biman, in your case, how did it happen?
Yeah, of course, we discussed several topics before we start the research, and since I done master's in computer science and I had interest in the technology side or the IT side, so we thought why not going for the additive manufacturing of technology. So then I discussed with Stefan and we submitted an abstract to the IJP conference at Innsbruck. So then it got interested and yeah, that's how.
Yeah, when Biman suggested this, and let me honestly mention this, I knew the word 3D printing. Yeah, and well, I also knew the word additive manufacturing, but basically, I had to take a look, and then of course we did the same double check, and again saw and then it didn't work out. There was not too much, and particularly if you look at life cycles of products and also improving products while you have them in use already, then additive manufacturing might be a very nice feature to change the product while it is in life already, and therefore we thought that this is also a good direction. Yeah. So you do a lot of double checks before you set a PhD student on a 3 to 4, 5 year agenda, and you need to be quite careful in doing so, and that's then the step that you see here is basically a consequence of the overall check. And if the field is not, how to say, too busy yet, if you see that there have been 3 literature reviews on a topic being published in the last 2 years, I'm just collaborating with some other colleagues, and just the last days, the leading colleagues sent me, there's 2 papers out already, let's forget about it. Yeah? So you have to be careful in doing so, and then you can basically get along, and this is not only holding for literature reviews, but it's holding, and that's why we illustrate it this way, for the total setting of how to choose your topic. The next challenge is, and I said already that this is theory driven, on what kind of theoretical approach do you basically take. In a quite recent paper, we've outlined that there's different ones. What we will show here is rather building on what we call a deductive approach. And we will illustrate this now in the next minutes on how we build on the research of others to go into the particular fields for the analysis. Yeah, let's keep it this way. Definition of core theoretical frameworks and constructs. That's then basically, I just said here, deductive. So we use something which we then illustrate in the coding scheme a bit later on, and do so. Let's hop to the examples, because I think then you can get this a bit better.
Yeah, so this is the first paper that we are talking about. It's on supply chain collaboration and sustainable performance in circular economy. So we conducted systematic literature review to understand how supply chain collaboration can support when circular economy is implemented into supply chains and improve the sustainability performance. So this is the focus area. So you can see like few keywords: supply chain collaboration, sustainability performance, and circular economy. So these are the 3 main aspects that we are looking into. So to understand what's already out there, you need a kind of a framework or a kind of some boundaries, like what you are really looking for. Otherwise you get lost, because there are so many things out there. So we specifically use 3 frameworks. One for CE implementation, that's circular economy implementation strategies. I hope you're familiar with the circular economy concept. Maybe I can briefly introduce. So what we already have is linear economy. So you derive things, and you make stuff, you just use them, and you just dispose them. There is no returning back into the cycles. So let's put it that way. But with circular economy, you're trying to minimize the waste. So in a perfect scenario, it's 0 waste. But for that, you need different implementation strategies. We already have reduce, reuse, recycle. So there are, we call it R's. So there can be 3 hours, 4 hours, 10 hours. Some people are saying 20 hours. So, but out of all these, we selected 10 hours, because then this is coming from paper from Wright and others published in 2018. So this paper specifically talking about how these hours, like reduce, reuse, recycle, and at which stages these implementations can be done. Normally, any company would do recycling, and then they say, when the buzzword coming circular economy, oh, we are circular because we do recycling, but in reality it's not. When they were linear economy, they have been doing that for so long. So with this framework, we are trying to understand actually how the CE implementation can be done, specifically related to a supply chain context. And then we are looking into supply chain collaboration. There are different ways you can collaborate. So there are so many frameworks. If you look into the supply chain literature, only into the supply chain literature. So with this, we are looking into the Chen and others published in 2017. So this paper was specifically talking on supply chain collaboration practices, which contributes to sustainability performance. So they have internal collaboration practices where the companies collaborate inside the company. So like people work together, cross-functional coordination, adopting environmental management systems, and so on. Then we have the external collaboration. They also have 2 parts. Where in supply chains, we normally talk about vertical collaboration. So where we only focus on suppliers and buyers, or the customers. But going beyond that, they introduce something called horizontal collaboration. Those third parties who are not directly related to the supply chain, but there can be universities, like research institutes, but they support the flow of materials or the knowledge or whatever for innovation and everything, the support to the supply chain. And also there are third-party organizations that can be non-governmental organizations. So all these people are falling under the category called horizontal collaboration. So this is the framework that we selected for supply chain collaboration, and finally for sustainability performance. So we were looking out for the triple bottom line aspect, where we are talking about maintaining environmental, economic, and social outcomes with a balance. So we found this paper called Side and Kirsten in 2017. They have very sophisticated, very elaborated activities or performance outcomes. So what falls under economic activities, what falls under, economic outcomes, social outcomes, and environmental outcomes. So with these frameworks, we try to understand, now we have the framework separately, and then we try to understand how they are connected with each other. Is circular economy implementation strategies really causing or sustainability performance outcomes? Or is the supply chain collaboration practices really supporting CE implementation strategies, or really CE implementation strategies need the supply chain collaboration? And ultimately, what's the final outcome from sustainability outcome? So these are the three frameworks we selected, and we try to understand in the paper when we're writing, so out there in literature, how they see the connection in between them.
Thank you, Jayani. And let me directly lead over by, we also looked at some similar things in Biman's side, so he does not need to repeat the CE and performance side. So therefore, we rather look at the additive manufacturing. I think that directly could explain it.
Yeah. So in Jayani's case, you saw that she's trying to connect those three frameworks. But in my case, we found this framework called, it was developed by Mela and others in 2014, and it was focusing on the additive manufacturing implementation. So we thought, okay, we take this framework and we take the circular economy concept, and we think, okay, how we can implement additive manufacturing in the circular economy. So we connect those two frameworks, and we use these 5 categories. So 5 main categories: strategy, supply chain, operations, and organizational change and technology. And we checked how we need to adjust to fit this additive manufacturing into the circular economy. So that is another approach you can take compared to Jayani's approach.
Already preparing the next steps, you then have to basically take a look at each of these boxes and how they are operationalized in the respective paper. You sometimes might have to double check with other papers so that it's not too specific and rather in line with each other. So each of these boxes, and also the same ones that you've seen with Ms.Jayani, is basically then operationalized pretty much the same as if you would do it in a survey, where you can almost, so to say, measure certain things. We'll try to illustrate this in the next step further. Returning to the next steps, now we basically have prepared the stage. We have decided on what to go for all of the topics. We have specified the theoretical framing and such things. And now we could go into the first, I would say, really operational step. And then in the literature review, it's basically the question on which kind of papers to include and which kind of papers to exclude. And how to do this. Typically, we look at peer-reviewed papers in English. So even German is disregarded, because who outside Germany would read German? Austria, okay, that doesn't count. Yeah, so English is basically the language in the science domain, and that's why you're typically limited to this. What you look for is then typically databases, quite often Scopus and Web of Science. For those of them, for Scopus, I'm not fully familiar. Web of Science, you can usually at least use the search function, even if you do not have a full account. So that's fine this way. And then it's also, even in Sri Lanka, people could look at least identify the papers for doing so. Then how you get access to the papers, that's sometimes a bit challenging. Let's also illustrate this step by looking at the decisions also taken there. So you have to define search terms and crafting research strings in trying to be quite precise. And you also have to keep in mind, therefore, on what kind of analysis you would do later on. And also how much papers you can include and how much you do the exclusion. And I think I hand over to Biman again for having worked on how this works with different technologies.
Yeah, actually this was my second paper. So this was published in Operation Management Research. So this was a bibliometric analysis on the intersection of 4 areas: in the Industry 4.0, supply chain, circular economy, and the quantitative methods. So in this case, usually the bibliometric 300 papers. So in my case, it was 440. So it was not really easy to do the content analysis. So that's why we selected this bibliometric analysis method, so that we can operationalize this and we can see what are the future directions, what are the current gaps, and how the research arena is going, which areas is it going, or which areas are emerging and which areas are declining. So first we did that, and in the coming slides, I will explain the steps of the search strings here. In here, as I earlier explained, my research focus was on 3D printing and circular economy. So that was the paper published in RGP. So in that paper, I had the additive manufacturing component separately and circular economy dimension separately. So for this, I had to define search keywords first to develop the search string. So as you can see, I have separate keywords for the additive manufacturing, because additive manufacturing is not very commonly used term. So you might know it by 3D printing. So 3D printing is another name for the additive manufacturing. So we use the 3D printing, and we use the star mark here because someone can use 3D print or 3D printing or 3D printed. So I use a star mark so that all those variants of the 3D printing are captured. So it's similar to the other keywords as well. And when it comes to the CE dimension, so as Jayani explained, we use the framework by Riker and others. So they have the 10 R's. So you can see the R's there: refuse, recycle, refurbish, reuse. So those are the 10 R's. And additionally, we tried several different keywords and checked whether these keywords are adding value or not. So then if it is marginal or if it is not adding any value, then we remove that keyword. So this is an iterative process, and we have to refine it. So as in here, you can see, after defining the search keywords and the search string, we went for the Web of Science as well as Scopus and did the search. So from the Web of Science, we got 364 hits, and in the Scopus we have 501, and then we merged those two databases, the results of those two databases, and then we had to remove the duplicates because those two databases are giving us the same results more or less. So that we had to remove it, and then we got 382 papers. So basically, then we had to focus really on the technical and managerial perspective in my case, because I'm focusing on the additive manufacturing because it's a technology. So we focused on this technical and managerial perspectives, and we removed papers such as in music or in optics or in physics. So we have the option to remove these things in Web of Science and even in Scopus. We have the filtering at the site navigation. So we removed that. Then we got 43. And then we had to really select the papers focusing directly addressing the intersection of additive manufacturing and circular economy. Because our search string might give you some papers who are just mentioning the additive manufacturing and circular economy. So that we have to read the papers, and we have to read the abstracts, and we have to fine tune the results. And then we removed some papers, and we got 49. And also when we were doing the research, since this is the time, because I even started this research in 2019 October, and I finished this paper by 20 April. So during that period, some of the new papers have been published. So we checked on the Google Scholar, and we added 2 new papers as well, so that this paper is up to date. Otherwise, sometimes when you submit it to the journals, they will say, okay, there are new papers published. Why don't we look at them? So that's why we updated, and then we got 51 papers for the final analysis or final content analysis.
And let me now take over, because 50 is about the lower threshold. If I have now seen at conferences the most extreme one ever, that was a review of 6 papers. 6 papers you can read in a day. So there's no need for a review. Yeah, it's absolutely nonsense. Sorry, it was also other people at the conference also said it was nonsense. On the other hand side, and we'll try to illustrate the method a bit more, I would say it's somewhere around 150 to 200 usually. And we have published in 21 another paper which used almost 280 papers in 4 subsets. And board that took quite some time to do all the coding and all the analysis. Yeah, so don't underestimate also these aspects in here. You then, Biman more or less almost explained the data extraction from the databases now that you get all of the papers, and in some cases also for us, you might have to email the author, you might have to use something like ResearchGate, where you can basically send a message to the author, can I please have your file, and then they are always allowed to share. So typically you can get access of the papers, even if you do not have direct access to the publishers. That's much more, that's also what's for us, and even for us it's an issue. And then you have these papers, and you would then typically reuse a package coming, data analysis package coming from Germany, that's makes QBA for qualitative data analysis. Internationally more common and a bit better known is NVivo, and there are some other tools. By now you can even do a bit of this in R, which would be free, but R comes then to limits in what you really can do and what you can get out there. In a very simple form, you might also just do it manually in Excel sheet, but using the software, you basically can document the process much better. You can mark papers much better. You can link content much better to each other. And therefore, this is quite helpful in doing all of this. Jayani, we did not prepare a slide because showing a coding table is a bit almost like you cannot squeeze it into such a slide, but can you elaborate a bit on the coding?
Yeah, sure. So I showed you 3 frameworks. So under each framework, we have the items that we call. So for instance, I told you about internal collaboration. So how do you do the internal collaboration? Through cross-functional coordination, let's put it that way. So these are the codings that you have. So you have to read each paper and see where these codes are appearing. Like, can I find, like, let's say 140 papers, I read all of them and try to understand is cross-functional coordination, what are they saying about it? So for all the 3 frameworks, let's say you may have sometimes, I don't know, 100, 150 items maybe. It depends on the size of your framework, how comprehensive it is, and so on. So you read the papers and try to understand where it's appearing. So that's why MaxQDA makes your life easy, because they have an option code. You have the code, you just drag and drop. So you select a sentence or whatever talks about, let's say, cross-functional coordination. So you just drag and drop the coding. So it's already there. So then you can later just double click the code and see all the codings appearing on, let's say, cross-functional coordination, then you read it and so on. So one of the drawbacks of this method is it can be quite subjective. So like what I feel as cross-functional coordination may not the same, but Stefan or Biman feels. So for that, to avoid that, like at least to remove this subjectivity, we normally do the coding with 2 to 3 other researchers as well. So normally we use masters.
Yeah, explain this a little, because this is quite particular what we do in Kassel, and even other colleagues in Europe do not always understand.
Okay, so normally we get the help of master students. So when they write thesis, we give some of the coding to them and ask them to do the coding. When we have a question, if you're not sure whether this coding is this really reflecting the coding that I have in mind, I would talk to one of my colleagues like Felipe Biman, because we were working on the same circular economy related topic. So we would sit and discuss like, oh, do you feel like this is internal collaboration? Maybe it's something else, or is this something related to circular economy? Because they define recycling like recycling, but it's not really recycling. Should I code this as recycling? So we call this intercoder reliability. So we try to come to common ground. Then the subjectivity is quite low, because most of the people who are involved in the coding are quite familiar with the topic. So this way, so this is quite laborious, I would say. You need a lot of effort, a lot of time, a lot of reading, but what you gain at the end of the day would be quite interesting, I would say.
Thank you, Jayani. Far more master students than other countries, which has a bit to do with the German academic tradition, and I don't want to go into these details. But as a consequence, we supervise as a team typically around 15 to 20 master students with the team. And therefore, we typically engage them into the different stages of a research project. And for us, it's a nice help, because we can improve intercoder reliability by the master student. They would not be involved into the framework selection, these kind of things, but we would just give all of this to them. They would do the coding and basically write in the thesis on the coding and this kind of part. So we choose the total scope of what the PhD student does to the time frame that the master students, in our case, typically around 5 months have, and involve them into these kind of things. Some of them you have to convince that this is not solving a practical problem in the company. I would always say universities must have the right to be also theory-driven, and this is what we typically do in such exercises. I know it's different in other words, and I'm not saying it's the best way, it's just the way we do it, and it's what I want to at least illustrate in a bit of understanding this against. Sorry, I should have gone to this slide already, so it's basically what Jayani just explained. It's as a method, it's called content analysis. Content analysis has various variants, and it can be done more qualitative and more quantitative, and typically, and also as Jayani explained it, it's a mixture of the two. So you count quite sharply, and quite often you do it really as a 0 and so 1. So the code is there, the code is not there, which sometimes also come to limits. We tried to improve the coding into more variants, but honestly, this didn't work out so far. It was with another team member where we tried this, and it didn't give anything. Yeah, so we stick to this at the moment. But this way, you typically get a very elaborate table, which you then can also use for subsequent statistical analysis. So you get basically a large table with all the codes on the one and all the papers in the other dimension. And then you extract this, and then you get a lot of 0s and 1, and 0s and 1 can then typically go into statistical analysis, where you can use R, but you can also use SPSS. So we have access to SPSS, and then use SPSS for the subsequent analysis. And what we typically do is that we then apply what is called contingency analysis. Contingency analysis, I'm not sure how much you remember of your statistics classes, most likely it was covered there, and Ralph would be much better in explaining this than I am, but never mind. So it's basically looking at the co-occurrence of certain items. Do certain codes co-occur more often than in a statistical random distribution? That's basically what you look at. Yeah, let's we'll show you how this works and what you can get out there. Then, of course, you have to look at validity and reliability. We mentioned the intercoder reliability already by using other coders and by being reflective in, of course, your research process accordingly. To show the total data analysis, I hand over to Biman again to illustrate how we have done it in his case.
Yeah, thanks. So these were the complete steps of the content analysis I did. It's called the Connecting Additive Manufacturing to Circular Economy Implementation Strategy. So the first step, as we explained, we had to select the frameworks. In my case, there were 2 frameworks. So additive manufacturing related one and circular economy related one. So we have 2 comprehensive frameworks there as the first step. And also on the other side, you can see we have selected the 51 papers after a rigorous process. So we had to apply some filters as well. And then, as the first step, we did the content analysis. So as Stefan explained, so we used the Seuring and Goal 2012 method. So we applied it, and then after the content analysis, then we moved to the second step, which is the contingency analysis. So there also we preferred the Gold et al. 2010 and Griffendorf et al. 2012. So there we applied some statistics, and we used SPSS for this. And we use the chi-square values and also the phi coefficient to identify the relationships or the co-occurrences which are significant. And then we got some, in my case, I got 40 contingencies. And then we developed kind of a framework there. And finally, we added another value to this by developing a causal loop diagram. So this was new. For the content analysis, I would say. So we wanted to create a summarized diagram showing the relationships, how additive manufacturing and circular economy are connected. So that's how we narrow it down to the causal loop diagram, and there we use the method provided by Ulligan et al. 2010. So we connected all these 3 steps, like content analysis, then contingency analysis, and finally causal loop diagram. But at the final step, we had to go back again to the content analysis and read the papers again, because in closed loop diagram, you have to show whether the two constructs have positive or negative relationship. So to justify this, we have to again go back, revisit the content analysis, and check what does the literature says about these two connections. Whether the material suppliers affect the customers, or material suppliers affect the additive manufacturing vendors. So is it on the other way around? So we had to check. So that we went to the coding. That's how the MaxQDA is very valuable, because we already have the coding scheme, and the coding in MaxQDA is saved. So we can export it to Excel if we like. So that's why having this kind of software support is very important, or I would say very helpful. So then we went back there and checked whether how does these connections are. So I would say like what is the relationship, whether it is positive or negative. Then we develop this causal loop diagram. So those are the steps in my case, but Jayani had a different case, so she would explain it in the slides.
We'll come to this in a minute. Here's typical steps for ensuring the quality that's extending a bit on validity and reliability. So the transparency of the method, that's what we try to also illustrate, that Biman nicely did this now. We are absolutely transparent on where the codes come from. Yeah, we are transparent and clear on where do the papers that we analyze come from. We show the method and all of these kind of steps. Some journals even would allow now to have appendices and even show some of the coding, how this is done and so on. And we showed the inclusiveness, and then also the explanatory, how do we get out of this. And last but not least, here we have the almost a heuristic element on interpreting the data, and we will illustrate this a bit more in the next steps. So sorry, now I took over from this slide. I did not see that the heading was used. Deciding on the structure of the paper. So now we have done all of the analysis, and now you, as academics, I would typically say, how do you communicate in academia so that you are heard, and that you are not only heard, I would say in our case, 3 villages beyond Kassel, yeah, but you have to publish in international journals, and that's basically the typical way how to communicate. If you are allowed to publish in the journals, then that gives you voice in you saying on your comprehension of science. And the structure is basically a very normal one, and you would have this in almost any empirical paper. You have an introduction, which comes with a problem statement, research question, and contribution, outline of the paper, then you go for the literature review section. In such literature review papers, I sometimes rather say, let us say, rather theory section, because it's a theoretical background as we introduced it in both cases. Then we have the method section, which you need to outline. The method section usually needs to be quite short, but still be precise, so that you cover all the steps of how did you collect data, how did you analyze data, and all of this. It's the same if you would do a survey or case study. It's the same logic. Then you look at the findings, and we'll come to some of the findings in a few minutes, and then discussion and conclusion. We'll also provide some more insights on this. Issues. And typically never mind, that's how it is. And a lot of them get rejected, and typically the argument for being rejected is they are too descriptive. Some frequencies of this also many papers came from the US. Then why is this insightful? It's not, because in almost any domain of science by now most of the papers come either from the US or from China. Yeah, so what? Yeah, and the so what question, which I just blended in rather by chance here, this is the typical one that you have to look at. What explanation do you give now against the theory that you start from, which is adding value to the theoretical comprehension of the field? This is what gets you in the top journals. And it's to our students, I sometimes say we want to play Champions League. I'm not sure whether you're into football or any other sports where they have a Champions League by now, but we want to play really on the international agenda and not once more in just the local one. Yeah? And the last one is then to look at which journals can you go for. Maybe that's a simple one. Typically, you either go for where you extract most of the papers from, Yeah, that would be a natural choice, or where you relate on the theory side from. So the Mellor paper that we used in Biman's case, that was printed in International Journal of Production Economics. So it was almost a no-brainer to go for the International Journal of Production Economics. Came from this journal. So that's how you then identify also where you can publish. And let's just to cut this a bit short. Jayani, this is now.
Yeah. So this is now the final story of the whole paper. So that's what I told you. It's quite laborious to do the content analysis, but once you have it, you find very nice findings there. So as you can see, these are the 3 frameworks I showed you, but now I have separated them and redesigned, refined the theoretical framework. So I have the CE implementation strategies.
No, you cannot. You can only do with the mouse.
Yeah, sorry, not realized. So you have these CE implementation strategies here, and now these are the supply chain collaboration dimension I had earlier. So these 3 were coming from a single framework, but now with the literature, I could realize that these are 3 collaboration themes that are quite important. So I could separate them. The collaboration practices, I could separate them into 3 categories. So one is relational collaboration, like where the strategic collaboration happens, and then stakeholders. There are so many stakeholders coming in. So I mentioned about this horizontal collaboration, and we have the operational collaboration, how the operation at the operations level, the collaboration is happening. And then it comes to sustainability outcomes. We realized that environmental and economic performance outcomes are going together. They're not quite separated. But when it comes to social performance outcomes, they are quite separated. They are not really linked into other aspects, where you can see like very less amount of arrows are coming into this social performance. So there you can, through the content analysis and also through the contingency analysis, we could understand these connections. Like CE implementation strategies are encouraging more relational or more strategic level collaboration practices, while they connect stakeholders, and these stakeholders mediate the relational collaborations, and then they empower operational collaborations. But if you look closely, the social performance is really coming only from stakeholders and operational collaboration, but it is not connected to CE implementation strategies. It's only still CE implementation is supporting environmental and economic performance. So this is like the conceptualization of your findings, because I have content analysis separately, I have contingency analysis separately, but when they are separately there, they're just findings. But how to combine this and create the story, like the whole story. So you have to think a little bit, and then you have to read the papers and try to understand the overview of the whole topic. So this is what we finally refined as a theoretical framework based on the analysis. This is kind of the final outcome of the paper.
Yeah. Let me blend in 2 notes. The first one, before this picture emerges, you usually look at 9 to 12 months of work, and in this time you hardly see anything. Yeah.
Really
this can be really frustrating. We have another team member now who's in the stage of doing the coding, and she was about to give up because she didn't see anything. From the frequencies alone, you basically don't see anything. Then having the statistics done, that's quick. That's an afternoon, a morning or an afternoon. The SPSS, you just do it and then you have it. But then interpreting again, and you see that the errors here are unidirectional, and the unidirectionality is not coming from SPSS. This is only coming from then going back to the original papers, looking at the total causality that they have in there, because once more, it's a contingency, it's not a causality analysis. Yeah, so you have to be very careful about this. And in some cases, and now we are leading over to Biman again, he mentioned that he had 40 contingencies, so that was almost so much that he could hardly get it into one chart. Yeah? So therefore, we saw the need for the theoretical condensation to do it into a simple one, and that's then the causal loop. Yeah, a few words from your side.
Yeah, that's Stefan. So this was the final outcome of my case, because as you saw in my study, I did the content analysis, contingency, and finally the causal loop. So this was the outcome we got. So earlier you saw the meta framework, they had 5 different main categories, but here we have defined different categories because we have clustered the categories or the items into 5 clusters. So one is drivers, and one is supply chain actors and key manufacturing decisions, operational practices, and At the bottom, you can see the C implementation strategies. So here we connected them and we look for the causality, and we saw, okay, drivers have a negative influence on the key aim decisions, and key aim decisions might influence on the drivers as well. But you can see some are even not connected. Drivers and C implementation strategies are not connected. And also on this causal loop model, we did some additional analysis as well, given by the Ulligan et al. 2010. If you read the paper, you can see whether the findings of those analysis, and that gives final story saying that, okay, some of these clusters have influence on some of these the other clusters. So the final outcome, we summarize this into a small figure, a causal loop diagram, and right now at this moment we are trying to test this model. So as the next paper, so that was the next step. So first we developed this causal loop model in my literature review, but then this gives you a future direction so that we can continue our research onto the other another paper. So we are right now developing another paper based on this causal loop model. So we are trying to test this. So we are trying to simulate this model and see what are the results of this causal loop diagram. So yeah, that's why it's important, as Jan mentioned, creating this kind of a summarized model is very important, because then you have some future directions as well, so that you can continue your work on this same line of research. So, yeah.
Yeah. So you see, and let me just emphasize this: we started from Jayani's case, just 3 boxes linked to each other. And through the analysis, we come to far more elaborate explanations, which really help us understanding the field, which show what is there. But you also need to think about what did we miss, what's not there. So sometimes also the really nice points in summing up the paper is pointing to research gaps. Yeah. So making theoretical contributions on the one hand side and identifying research gaps on the other hand side. This is what typically makes literature review papers valuable, and that's quite also why some of them at least get quite well cited, because this is what other people then can build on. And Biman just illustrated this. Now we have a model, the very big one with 40 contingencies you cannot put into any simulation. But this you can put into simulation and maybe also into system dynamics. So that's why we have the plus and minus. So we have some enforcing loops and some moderating loops in there, so that you could use now some quantitative tools to do some modeling based on this. Yeah, so you get the outcomes in this way. This figure is more in for completeness. We showed now the decisions in a sequence in the original paper, which is under review, and we hope to have it forthcoming soon. And it would, if it accepted for the journal where it's under review now, it would even be open access. It's just showing that there's many interrelationships in the decisions. So if you make one decision, then it's impacting the next one. I'm not illustrating all of them now, that would be too much, but it's just making you aware of with the early decisions, and that's what you clearly see. You always drive the later ones, and that's typically for any product design, that's for any service design, for any other things that you do, and of course it also holds for developing academic research and papers. Very briefly summing up what to take away on the practical side, it is a method that you can use. The big advantage is you are only dealing with data that you don't have to chase. Yeah, the databases are there, the papers are there, you can analyze it. On the other hand side, don't underestimate how much time it takes. We try to emphasize this. Yeah, so Jayani started in June 2019 and submitted the paper
in September 2020.
September 2020, and it was accepted in
January 2022.
January 2022. Yeah. So just to give you an idea, and this is also a hint on the publishing side. So that was about less than 18 months between submission and acceptance. This is, and I have a simple rule: 6 months, brilliant, very fast. 12 months, very good, still nice. 18 months, still all fine, acceptable. 2 years, not so nice anymore, but happens. Beyond 2 years, nightmare. Yeah. So don't underestimate these time frames, because I sometimes see that people have a PhD or a master's student starting, and then like, yeah, you have to have a paper in the first year. Sorry, I then always say, well, I don't know, but in my case, it basically does not happen. Yeah. and I have supervised a few PhD students by now. Academic hint, and we try to really illustrate this here, clear link to theory. If you do not know what the theory is when you start, then of course you can also do it inductively. But developing it inductively is even much more harder, because then you would work with the papers. We have done this in a paper published in 2017 in the Journal of Business Ethics on the social and sustainable supply chain intersection. And in this case, we developed it inductively, and I think we used about 7 or 8 doctoral seminars and conferences to share our thoughts and ideas with the research community, to get feedback, to refine our ideas before it was ready to be sent to a journal. Yeah, so that was also not quick, believe me, that was even longer. But of course, there are some arguments also for a more inductive approach, developing it out of the body of the literature than you have. And the third one requires the first two. Yeah, you need to invest the time, you need to invest the theory and all of this, and then you might have a chance to send it finally to a good journal. Many thanks for your patience here and listening to us. No, we don't have a thank you slide. We forgot this one, so I just have to say this. Many thanks for bearing with us, because we were longer with the presentation than initially expected, but we wanted to give you rather some detailed insights on how the research happened and how the process goes on. And this is not something quick, it's rather something which trains your patience. And I always have this as a warning for if I discuss with somebody on starting a PhD, then I always clearly mention, be aware that PhD will have to move your frustration tolerance barrier. This is that. That's it. Many thanks, and happy to take any questions. Also from the audience, which is...
The researchers, you can ask any question if you have. Please use this golden opportunity to ask it.
Yeah, you can also write it into the chat, of course, if this is easier.
We can use chat.
There's something in the chat already. Good.
Yeah.
Just open the chat. The elimination process, like let me go back to the. That's now I'm in the other program, so that's like when I need to go back into PowerPoint and we get the point of this. Yeah.
And you find the papers.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just trying to get there. Do you want to say something, or shall I? You get started.
Yeah. So yeah, thanks for the question. So yeah, someone is asking, could you explain the particular tools that you may have used in order to properly keep track on the elimination process? So how do we eliminate the papers? So I would say to remove the duplicates, I use R. So that is open source and it's free. So they have some codes that where you can upload the CSV file to the R, and it will identify the similar DOIs, because DOI is a unique identifier for each paper journal article. So using the DOIs, if the DOIs are similar, then R has a function so that you can easily remove the similar papers. So that's like 1 minute work, I would say. So removing duplicates was very easy. And the focusing on technical and managerial perspectives, you can use Web of Science or Scopus. In their site navigation, they have some filtering steps, like you can select the papers published only in English. You can select Web of Science categories, like you can remove the papers in physics or in optics or in biomedical science or medical science. In my case, I have removed all these things. Or else you can even opt to keep the business and economics papers only, or version management papers, or something like that. You can either opt to remove papers, or you can opt to keep the papers. So they have both options in the site navigation of Web of Science as well as in the Scopus. So that's how we removed we focused on the technical and management perspective. So in the next step, you have to read the paper. So the focusing on directly addressing additive manufacturing, or either your focus is on another different field. So you have to read the paper and you have to check in the abstract or even in the full paper whether this paper is really addressing this or whether they are only mentioning this. Because I would say in the science, when we are retrieving the papers, we use the title, abstract, keywords. So the search is only focusing on title, abstract, and keywords. So sometimes authors can add some keywords into their keyword list, but they are not really focusing on that. They are just only mentioning that. So that we have to read the paper and let's see this paper is addressing this or not. So
thanks, man. There's a lot of manual reading in the first level. I would say typically read the abstract, and you can eliminate a lot of them. But it's also sometimes, as Jayani explained, a double check with your team members on what you still see, and if you then typically try to explain it to somebody else, that's usually very helpful in clarifying your own ideas on this is still in and this is still not in anymore. But the boundaries of including a paper or not including a paper, that's the same as Jayani explained for the coding, is a very fine decision. Yeah? And the last paper still to be included could, of course, also be excluded. So that's then sometimes it's also an issue of the size of your data set. So if your data set gets beyond 100 papers, then you might be a bit harsher in excluding papers. If you have a rather limited data set, you might be a bit softer and rather take in some more so that you have a sound sample. But if you do it wrong, let me also mention, then if the papers are too diluted, too diverse, then you would not, most likely you would not find anything later anymore. The coding process, and Jayani, a bit on your side.
So the coding process, the most important thing, like the crucial part, is identifying the correct, or rather most comprehensive framework, I would say. Then what you are looking for, when you say coding, you are trying to understand what's out there in the literature and limit it to your framework. So there are so many things out there. So of course, based on the framework that you select, you limit yourself. So it's one of the drawbacks of this method. So you should know, this is my boundary. So this is what I'm specifically looking for. Sometimes, for instance, if you take supply chain collaboration, you can even sometimes take 2 or 3 frameworks if you feel like this is too narrowed down. So let's say, in my case, in this paper, I'm only focusing on supply chain collaboration practices, but not how the, like, which type of it, is it through information sharing or something like that? It's not covered in this framework. So if I want to make it more comprehensive and elaborative, then I have to look for other frameworks. So once you have the frameworks, what we say, I wish we could show them what the framework means.
Maybe in detail?
No, maybe in Biman's one, maybe we can show like what we mean by a framework.
Yeah, return a little more. Up, yeah. So it's faster this way.
Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, you can even show your
The framework, Biman's framework? Yeah, maybe. So this is a simple framework, and you have different categories like aim strategy. Under aim strategy, alignment between business is one item. So this is what we are saying coding. We are looking specifically where in the literature they are talking about alignment between business. So this is what we are saying coding, in the sense, not from the computer science per se, but we're trying to understand where this particular alignment between business idea is appearing. So what does it mean? So we are trying to understand, okay, these are like in my studio, if you click on this, like say this item, particularly alignment between business, you can see all the places where this alignment business between business appearing throughout all the papers. So after you read that, you can clearly understand what they're talking about, alignment between business. So this is what we mean by coding. Maybe that's how.
Let me add a little in the process and the analysis. They always have that you go through various loops, and these loops are particularly relevant at the start of the process, because you basically need to sharpen your terms. So once you read, you gain understanding. And once you understand better, then you might have to read again. The challenge this way is that you might have to go through various rounds of coding. Yes. Yeah. So once more, we took off several months of work. We don't talk of an afternoon just doing something quick. Because in computer science, coding is something different than for such data analysis. Yeah? And as Jayani pointed out against this one, you have to basically see, is the paper already providing enough detail that you can develop the single items which are precise enough, or do you have to gain more precision? And sometimes then, of course, you turn to other papers to do so. Let me elaborate a little more what you bypassed. We typically almost, if we do this, it's a very laborious process anyway, and we typically code for too many frameworks. So we start, I sometimes explain this in an unfortunate bit of militaristic picture. So you have a target and you shoot at the target with multiple bullets, and some of the bullets will hit and some of the bullets will miss. And also the bullets need to be of the right size. If the bullet is too big, it blows the target away and you don't see anything anymore. Yeah, like if you use the meta theory for additive manufacturing, if you say transaction costs for additive manufacturing, it blows the topic away. Yeah, if you are too small, then you only scratch the surface. Yeah, then that's like having a scratch from a stitch or something like this on the surface, then it's also not it. So you need to have the right precision. And let me really be careful here. This is not too easy. And let me also say this, even after doing such things for more than 10 years, we can, in my team, we can still be wrong. Yeah? There's no guarantee. You usually get a bit of a feeling in between, like latest when you select the papers, if there's enough papers and how the keywords come up and how quickly this goes on, there should be something. But even if the content analysis works out, then there's no guarantee that the contingency analysis works out. In one other paper with another colleague, we have then used cluster analysis because the cluster analysis showed us something, while the contingency analysis showed us absolutely nonsense. Yeah? So this is, but it's the same that you do if you have a survey and do data interpretation at the end, then your structural equation model may work, or your structural equation model may show you it's not so good. Yeah, and that's, let me encourage this almost, because if we know all the outcomes already, then I would say the risk, and there's absolutely no risk in the research, then I would say it's boring. If it's boring, you don't get into the really good journals, because if other people basically say, so what? Yeah, why care? So there must, and if you don't take any risk in doing also some research which is not perfectly working out, then I would say it's not worth it. But now finding the right balance among the risk side and the safeguard so that a PhD student has something, because I typically then say a PhD student after 4 years can also not go there and say, this didn't work, and this didn't work, and this didn't work, and this didn't work. Yeah? That does also not get you a PhD. So we have to find a balance among being risky and being challenging what we have in the field, and on the other hand side, being safe enough so that we most likely find something. And let me emphasize this, I have now been in such a role for quite some years. We will see the completion of the 30th PhD students who were supervised by me this year, which is Jayani. Yeah? And still, I sometimes do not know. Yeah? It's not that I have all the wisdom and it's always clear, no, unfortunately. And it's again a point that where we particularly are lucky to have quite some master students, because a master student from my side, if I supervise a master student, they are allowed to just write, no, it's not working out. Then we still learn something for the other research. And there's another question. When coding, do you also consider the analysis? Typically not. We are not too worried about the causality. You could do so, that's true. There's now I need to remember a word. Yeah, you can do pairwise comparisons, but there's another concept which I came across and I unfortunately forgot it, where you rather look at certain constructs and how the constructs are related to each other, even in coding. I've seen this in the literature review on the information system side. Yeah, so there is other techniques. Let's clearly emphasize this. Therefore, this is a really good question. This is one particular way of doing it. This is not the way of doing it. Yeah, it's a way of doing it. Yeah? And of course, you can also do this in a different manner.
And also based on the way we do the coding this way, we are trying to combine qualitative analysis with quantitative analysis.
Yes.
So if you do a pairwise coding, it can be mostly qualitative, I would say.
Yeah, you can do different variants, and what's more, you can also look at how do certain constructs go together, then you would be a bit closer to like typical survey logics and such things, but then you also have to be careful on how you interpret the data. Okay, any more questions also from here? Anything that we can answer?
You gave some example using some published articles. And, how challenging was it to publish these articles?
To publish?
Yeah.
Well, we explained the timeline, and I'm not sure how familiar you are in sending in a paper to a good journal. The first step is to be accepted into the review process at all. Yeah. So we managed this one, and in the first round of reviews, the lucky punch is not to be rejected. So the major revision, as this is called, is the typical thing that you want to get in the first round. And that's what we got in both of these cases. And then in the second round, if you're down to a major revision, then that's perfect. And if you get accepted after 2 revisions, wow, that's it. Yeah. If you might have, it happens that we even had, together with a colleague who's also in the room, we had a case where we got rejected after 3 major revisions. And at the end, I felt that the reviewers rather drove us in the 3rd revision to make the paper worse than better. So when we then worked further with the paper, we threw the 3rd revision away. So that also happens. Yeah. Well, this is I would say they are a bit of the experience of the supervisor and so on helps. And if you have a bit of a feeling of like the paper really fits the journal, yeah, and the key point, a very simple point, typically overlooked in submissions, right? There is always the field letter to the editor. And I have been an editor for a journal for 8 years in a row, and I decided about 50 papers a year in this role, and rarely the letter to the editor was used. But the letter to the editor has to be used, and you make a very brief argument. Why do you send this paper to this journal? Why should the editor deal with your paper? Give him a good reason why he or she should do so. Yeah, and in many cases, when I'm still associate editor for 3 journals at the moment, yeah, and quite often you see that this is not done. And so you waste the chance of communicating with the editor in a very brief manner. Make a very short argument, and in this case it was very simple. So here we just stay with what we have there. We are building on the paper of Meller, published in your respective journal, and that's why we contribute to also you have CE, circular economy related publications. And that's why we see this is a very nice fit to the journal, and would be very happy to have the paper accepted into the review process. No more, that's it. Don't write 10 pages. Yeah, 2 or 3 sentences, but be precise and position it. And then you still, let's also be very honest, despite the fact that we have published some papers, we still get rejected. So that happens. Yeah, that can happen. We don't get too many desk rejects, I would say, because we try to be careful in the journal selection and also in the process. Of course, we get eventually rejected for the paper not being perfect here, being not perfect there, and this is a normal thing. And that's, I would say, not too much an issue. Typically, in crafting a paper, we would ideally have minimum 2 journals in mind. Yeah, going beyond 2, you have to be careful, and let me also explain this at the case that we have here. So this one we positioned on the production side. So the paper was at the intersection of additive manufacturing and circular economy, but additive manufacturing is more in production journals, circular economy is more in sustainability management and technology journals. So we could also have positioned into, let's say, something like Journal of Cleaner Production or Resource Conservation and Recycling, but then you need a completely different introduction, because we position once more into the production side, and I cannot position into the production side and into the resource conservation and recycling side in the same lines. Then I have to rewrite the introduction. So if you change the journal, then you have to see, do I thereby also change the focus of where to submit to? This is I'm not sure, I would say this is cheap hints, but if you do this wrong, then the likelihood, if you don't change, and one more hint, and I have seen this, I'm not sure, as an author you typically do not know, but I have really had cases where I rejected a paper as an editor, and 3 weeks later I got the same paper sent to me as a reviewer. And as long as I then see that the authors have been serious with the comments that they got and improved the paper, then this is all good. You should have a second chance with the paper. But if I get word by word the very same paper again, and I have had such cases, then the author got word by word the same review again. Yeah, I mean, this is an unlucky punch. Yeah, not happening too often, but so particularly in the good journals, take the feedback that you have serious. You really might end up at the same desk. Despite that this is a global world with many people doing research and so on, you might still end up at the same desk again. Yeah, and then once more, if I have also had the same case where I then saw, well, they have really taken it serious, they have really improved the paper, it's really a better paper now, here we go. And then I have also seen that some of them got accepted. So that's all fair. Any other comments? I also have, sorry, I need glasses, otherwise I cannot read this. Yes, please.
In the systematic literature review process, after selecting the suitable databases, do you set the time frame as one of the criteria?
Sure.
What is the ideal? It is
yes,
10 years, 20
perfect.
years?
Here comes the question. I just repeat it for the audience so that you can hear. Here comes the question on the time frame that you select. The time frame is actually one of the options that you have for also including more or less papers. Yeah. A clear warning, because many people show them that more papers were published in the last years and show an upward trend. Well, you would, nobody does it, but you would have to normalize against the total output globally in papers, and they have also been increasing. So it's no matter that also a certain topic increases. Still, it's a nice argument of you see there's some relevance growing in such things, so that can be the case. I would say a lower threshold. I have seen very good papers in the blockchain domain, which is a very rapid developing field at the moment, which only looked at 3-4 years. Typically, I would say it's more about how many papers do you have. If you really have 100 papers published in 3 years, then the 3 years might be sufficient. Yeah. Else, typically 5 to 10 years, 20 years, something like this can be appropriate. But I would rather say this is a matter of also adjusting the size of your sample. If you need 20 years or everything from the start of the topic to have a sufficient sample, then you can also do 20 years. In some cases, we did not show this here, but in one case that I bypassed and I mentioned it already. In one case, we now showed that the method can also be applied to distinguish among time frames. So it's another paper in International Journal of Production Economics. We are a bit IGPE biased today, never mind. Yeah. And we showed in this paper that you can differentiate among time frames. So we have 2 time frames, and we have 2 industries. We have the automotive and the textile apparel industry in there. And no, sorry, the automotive and the food industry in there. And we can also show that we can distinguish among industries. So there's basically 4 figures of contingency analysis in there. Let me just to show you again something like this, yeah. And in the food industry, you see that it is a lot about hygiene and food safety and food standards and these kind of things. In the automotive industry, it's pretty much about monitoring, managing suppliers, managing production processes, managing product design and such things. So you really see a differences among the industries, and you also see a difference among the time frames. But again, a warning, for this one, we coded roughly 280 papers. In total, we worked on this paper, I would say, for about 4 years. From the start to the end, and then comes in what Biman mentioned, and you have to update your database in between. I cannot send in a paper in 23 saying my last paper analyzed is now from 280. Yeah. So we tried to build up the subsamples. So the older subsamples were a bit easier because they were done, but the younger subsamples we had to basically update in the process. And I forgot how many master students were used in helping us with the coding. Yeah, but that was absolutely nothing quick. So be careful in making your choices, because particularly as a master and a PhD student, you have a quite limited time frame. And in our case, we typically look at, let's say, plus minus 4 years. And typically, I would say if you spend about the first year just on this, the advantage, even if you don't get a paper out here, I would say my people never go to conferences and present and then get told off for not knowing the literature. This is the minimum that you get this way. You really know the body of literature that you are working on. You cannot be surprised by somebody saying, but you have not read this, this, and this, and then have seen this at conferences, and then you have PhD students, then they're, yeah, you're right, I didn't read it. No, I don't want this. Yeah, I'm in this way, yeah, I would say I'm a bit of a literature freak. Yeah, so as a bit of a warning in these things. But I would always say for making a contribution, you have to know your field, and they have to know their field better than I do. It's absolutely obvious. I cannot read what they read. And reading for master students, I typically say, yeah, master student, 500 pages a month is the minimum. If you don't do this, then you're not doing enough. So they have to, because you need to know your field, you need to know what to build on, you need to get these ideas and be reflective and so on, and then you move on. It's but let me also clearly say, I'm not sure who is now a bachelor and master student or a PhD student. For my comprehension, a master student, we would very, 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 very rarely publish a master thesis. Yeah, we did so in the case of Lara, who's here in the room, but in her case, I convinced her already before she knew that she would become a PhD student. Yeah, so that's why we tried to set up the master thesis already this way. But this is a very, very, very rare case. And once more, I'm supervising many, 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 many master students, and still it's a very, very, very rare case. Okay, just to get this right. Yeah, we sometimes can use some of their work, which we mentioned several times, but it's also the way the density of writing that we expect from a journal. You typically have some, let's say for the text body, you have somewhere around 8,000 words, something like this. Yeah? And the density that we expect, the typical master student and the starting PhD student finds very, very hard. Yeah? So you have to train also stepwise the writing process. You write in an introduction, and the introduction is allowed to be maximum 1,000 words. And then we revise it, we scrap it, we revise it, we scrap it, and so on. And then you look at the theory part, and so on and so forth. And then, yeah, you stepwise go there. The method part is usually quite okayish, because it's quite standardized in many techniques, what you have to report there. Yeah. So the method part is also typically something to start with in the writing, because it also, you landed early on, and it should not change too much, and all fair enough. Yeah. But the hardest, looking back at the part is then the discussion. The discussion is about what contribution do we make to the body of knowledge that is extending the body of knowledge. You cannot write a sentence, my contribution or our contribution is. If you cannot complete the sentence, don't hand in your paper. Yeah? And that's not easy. This is typically, I would say this is the part of the paper where I'm involved in the direct writing myself the longest. It's a just to give a too complete answer, or to mention too many things, not just your question. Any other points? And be encouraged. The nice point about research is we can always have a new idea. Yeah, you mentioned about ChatGPT. We don't know yet. Yeah, before this now came about, I was aware again, AI. Yeah, there's something that's called artificial intelligence, but what it would be used for, and even AI is a nice illustration, because in AI we had quite some predictions that almost went wrong. Yeah. So they predicted we have self-driving cars on the roads. That didn't happen so far. Yeah. Even a robot doing AI could not clear the cups off the table, which is, as a human being, you don't need a brain to clear the cups off the table. Yeah, absolutely no. And still an AI cannot do. And on the other hand side, now the AI gives us some answers to some, I'm not sure whether to research questions, I doubt, but to some questions. which are quite clever, and we have to see what to do with it. And we have to integrate this into our teaching, even I do not know yet how. And we have to see how to use it in a creative manner. And it's definitely triggering new decisions. In the supply chain field, that we just elaborate one thing. We now see that satellite data is used for tracking and tracing products on, like, does a textile producer really produce in the own factory, or do the lorries always go to a sub-supplier which is not in the contract? And now, using satellite monitoring data, the first companies say you now can do so. Yeah, that's of high relevance in here directly in Sri Lanka for producers. Yeah, and it would enable remote monitoring of such things, and AI now enables such things. That's what I've heard. I'm not the AI person, but we have to basically look at, does it change, and there's all this change going on, and the change guarantees that we will always have clever, nice research questions, and you get recognized if you can think ahead. Yeah? And again, I know I'm too much sitting on the theory side, but I would typically say universities should be allowed to think ahead minimum 10 years. Hard to do, not guaranteed, and not sure what I would say about myself. Yeah, but if you just solve day-to-day problems, then you would not be, at least not be internationally recognized. Then you would be recognized as a consultant, and that's also fine. I don't mind. Yeah, and also different academics use the academic freedom that we have in different ways, and that's absolutely perfect and fine. If everybody would do the same as I do, that would be a boring world. So that's not the solution.
So thank you so much,
Many thanks.
Professor and Ms.Jayani and Mr.Biman. So we learned a lot. So nice discussion and nice presentations are here. So thank you so much. Dear researchers, do you have any things to clarify here, or you have to?
Yeah, many thanks for giving us this opportunity to show a bit of a piece of our reach, and very happy to be here, just to say this again. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we are like out of the time, so we have to bring our sessions to close. I would like to express our heartfelt thanks to our distinguished panelists for your valuable contributions. Then 11th research launch will be held on April with more color and diversity. So until we meet in next research launch, take care and goodbye to all. Thank you.
Thank you.